definition in this piece of legislation.
Order. Senator Brown, we're moving to questions without notice. Senator Reynolds.
Mr President, I seek leave to make a statement.
Is leave granted? Senator Wong.
Thank you. We will give leave. I would like to seek some clarity, and we can have some discussion across the table about the capacity of the Senate to take note of it and therefore the consequences for question time. But on the basis that those discussions will be had, the Labor Party will give leave as the Minister's requested.
Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President. Mr President, I refer to the serious matters relating to my former staff member, Ms Brittany Higgins, who was employed in my ministerial office when I was the Minister for Defence Industry. And I take this opportunity to provide the Senate with a further statement. On Monday evening, we heard in Brittany's own words the harrowing account of her alleged sexual assault in my ministerial office in 2019. Brittany's story has occasioned a wider reckoning of how women are treated in this building. It has prompted a national conversation about how we ensure women are safe in their workplace, wherever that is, and how we support them when they need our care. As a woman who has spent much of her working life in politics, much of it in this very building, I welcome that conversation, and I welcome the reviews announced by the Prime Minister. My hope now is that we can address this very serious issue as a parliament, away from the politics. Mr President, I've been asked a series of questions surrounding the circumstances of Ms Higgins' alleged sexual assault and the actions that were taken by myself and my then Chief of Staff as a consequence. I will do my best to answer them. I became aware incrementally over a period of days of Brittany's story during private conversations with her and my then Chief of Staff and via reports from parliamentary authorities. On Tuesday the 26th of March, my then Chief of Staff called Brittany and a male co-worker into separate meetings concerning what, at that point, appeared to be a security breach involving unauthorised access to my office. The following day, the Secretary of the Department of Parliamentary Services provided a report concerning the security breach. On Monday the 1st of April, I met with Brittany and my then former Chief of Staff. During this meeting, I made it clear to Brittany that she would have my full support in whatever course of action she decided to take, and that she would have full access to counselling services. My Chief of Staff and I moved quickly to ensure that Brittany was given access to the police should she wish to make a complaint. In terms of the actions taken by my then Chief of Staff and by me in the days and weeks that followed Brittany's alleged assault, we at all times followed the advice of the Ministerial and Parliamentary Services and the Department of Finance, as was appropriate. I have full confidence that my then Chief of Staff and I, at all times, acted in what we believed were in the best interests of Brittany. Mr President, throughout this entire time, my sole desire has been to let Brittany herself determine how this matter would be dealt with. I fully appreciate that it is the proper duty of the Senate, of all of us in this chamber, to ask hard questions about how this incident was dealt with. But at the time, this was a difficult, it was a complex, and it was a highly sensitive matter. At all times, to me, Brittany's welfare and her right to privacy were paramount to me. For my part, I am deeply sorry that Brittany felt unsupported at the time of the incident and in the months that followed, and in fact the years that followed. I'm also deeply sorry that some of my actions and my handling of this matter added to Brittany's distress. The Prime Minister has announced an independent review into the culture of Parliament House and the processes in place to deal with serious incidents such as these. It is a move I welcome. It is a move I think we can all agree that is long overdue. Mr President, it is now incumbent of all of us in this place to let the independent processors, now in train, consider these matters? Thank you.
Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. Consistent with what I indicated prior to question time, what I'd request of the government is, can I acknowledge the minister's given that statement? I think that is important. I would ask that we allocate a finite period of time on Monday for the Senate to take note of the statement. I think there have been a few things in that which it would be useful for us to reflect on and consider, so I would invite the government to indicate so.
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank Senator Wong. The government will facilitate a time-limited discussion in relation to the statement at an appropriate time on Monday.
Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. The RBA Governor, Dr Lowe, told the National Press Club, and I quote, "When the JobKeeper program finishes at the end of March, we expect some additional job losses." The Secretary of the Treasury also conceded last week that there will be job losses when JobKeeper is axed. How many Australians will lose their jobs when the government axes JobKeeper in 38 days?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Mr President, the government has always been honest that in dealing with a global pandemic, with a crisis of unprecedented proportions in terms of its economic impact right around the world, that tragically not every job or every business would be able to be saved from the disruption that has occurred. The actions, however, that we've taken have delivered a remarkable outcome for Australia in terms of saving jobs, saving businesses and indeed ensuring our economy is firmly back on track and progressing in a direction that we want to see around its recovery. And indeed, today we welcome labour force figures released that show yet again a decline in the unemployment rate in Australia. That in January the unemployment rate fell.
Order. Senator Gallagher on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr President. Point of order is relevance. I'm sure the government has the opportunity through Dorothy's to go through the jobs data today, and I'll be surprised, but unless they surprise me. But my question was specifically about job losses, and the minister hasn't come to that, including how many will be lost when JobKeeper ends.
Thank you, Senator Gallagher. I've allowed you to restate the final part of the question. The question did refer, and the quotations, to jobs and the labour market, and I think the minister, with respect, is being directly relevant by talking about jobs. I can't instruct him how to answer a question. Senator Birmingham.
Well, Mr President, I hate to break it to the Shadow Minister for Finance, but the measure of unemployment by the Australian Bureau of Statistics is a measure of people without jobs in the Australian economy. And what we saw in January was the unemployment rate fell from 6.6% to 6.4%. More importantly, Mr President, employment increased by 29,100 additional jobs in January 2021, the fourth monthly increase in a row, Mr President. Now, Mr President, this is a government that has quite consistently supported people through the pandemic, but also acted in a way consistent with principles, where we said that measures we put in place would have to be temporary, targeted and proportionate to the circumstances that are there. That's what we've done with JobKeeper. We absolutely delivered an economy-wide solution at the point of the pandemic's depths. We have tapered it off, and we are now, thanks to the recovery that's in place, able to move to more targeted approaches.
Senator Gallagher, a supplementary question.
Mr President, I note the minister avoids answering the question. My supplementary, Save Victorian Events, a group advocating for Victoria's $10 billion a year events industry, performed a survey earlier this month that found if JobKeeper ends in March, 43% of companies surveyed will need to let staff go, and an additional 40% will potentially need to close their businesses. How many of the 493,000 businesses accessing JobKeeper will fold due to this government withdrawing support prematurely?
Senator Birmingham.
Well, thanks, Mr President. Well, I reject the idea, any concept of premature withdrawal. What this government has done is to put in place an an intervention in the Australian economy and in private businesses unprecedented in its scale. The scale of investment that we have put into the Australian economy has been unprecedented in terms of its scale, the dollars involved and the nature of the intervention that was put there. And of course, as we tightened the eligibility for JobKeeper, as the rates around JobKeeper declined, those opposite came in here each time and predicted doom and gloom. They told us that at the end of September, we would see catastrophe. At the end of December, we would see catastrophe. And yet, what we've seen is the Australian economy has continued to grow the number of jobs. The unemployment rate has continued to go down. Now, there will be difficult times ahead, no doubt about it, but our measures have worked and are working.
Time for the answers expired. Senator Gallagher, a final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. The National Australia Bank has joined the chorus of economists and experts warning against prematurely abandoning support, saying, and I quote, "It is critical that while support will be loosened in better performing parts of the economy, the overall stimulus package is not withdrawn too quickly." Why is the Prime Minister withdrawing support without any plan for businesses to stay open and workers to keep their jobs?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Senator Gallagher clearly wasn't listening when the last budget was handed down, because there is an enormous amount of support, stimulus and activity still going into the Australian economy, even past the end of March. The measures put in place to stimulate investment across the Australian economy, the Home Builder program that is providing a huge wave of activity in the construction sector, the tax cuts that we've legislated that are providing for an additional $1 billion plus going into the pockets of Australian households each and every month going forward, the fact that we have got in place the loss carryback provisions for Australian businesses to be able to sustain themselves, all of these measures are ongoing. All of these measures are ongoing past the end of March. Now, we do not shy away from the fact there are difficult times for certain businesses. We are working through consultation with them. We will look at targeted approaches. But, Mr President, we are seeing an economic response in Australia.
Order. Senator Abetz.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck. Can the Minister update the Senate on the latest developments in the plan to roll out the COVID vaccine, which has a priority focus on Australians most at risk from this crippling virus, including in our home state of Tasmania?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Senator Betts, for your question. Rolling out the COVID vaccine across Australia is one of the government's highest priorities. The country is on track for the first and most vulnerable of Australians to start receiving the vaccine from Monday, Mr President. Senator Betts, I'm pleased to inform the Senate that there are 16 Pfizer vaccination hubs across Australia, including in our home state at the Royal Hobart Hospital. Thousands of aged care residents in Australia at more than 240 facilities will receive their first COVID-19 vaccine dose next week. The facilities are located across Australia in over 190 towns and suburbs, in rural and urban areas, in every state and country. Next week, in our home state of Tasmania, Mr President, Senator Betts, rollout of the vaccines will occur in aged care facilities in Burnie, Legana, Newnham, Newstead, Norwood, Penguin, Riverside, Somerset, St Leonards, Ulverston and Wynyard, Mr President. Of the 142,000 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine which arrived into the country this week, approximately 80,000 doses will be released next week. Approximately 30,000 vaccines will be made available for the Commonwealth Vaccine In-Reach workforce to aged care and disability care residents. Information has been sent out to aged care facilities for residents, their families, carers and loved ones about what to expect in the lead-up to and on vaccination day. The Department of Health has sent a readiness toolkit to aged care facilities, including clinical requirements and a checklist for vaccination day.
Senator Abetz, a supplementary question.
Thanks for that good news, and I ask further, can the minister outline the government's plan to ensure all Australians are aware of how and when to access the vaccine?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank you, Senator Abetz. Mr President, we are investing $31 million on a public information campaign to keep Australians up to date about the COVID-19 vaccines as they become available and when, how and where to get the jab. As part of our public information campaign, we're investing an additional $1.3 million for peak multicultural organisations to help reach culturally and linguistically diverse communities. The campaign will run across a number of channels, including regular website updates, social media, health professionals, local community and grassroots organisations, networks and the mainstream media, Mr President. And will include advertising in 32 languages across radio, print and social media, extending to communities that are harder to reach through traditional channels.
Order.
Our message,
Senator Colbeck,
Mr President—
time for the answer has expired. Senator Abetz, a final supplementary question.
Can the minister also provide an update on how the vaccine rollout will assist with the government's plan for economic recovery?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Senator Abetz. With our economic recovery well underway, Australians can have cause for optimism and hope as we emerge from COVID. Vaccinating Australians against this virus will go a long way to rebuilding confidence in the Australian economy. While we'll always be guided by the best in medical advice from our experts, we know that reducing the risk of COVID through vaccination will result in Australians moving more freely back to work, back to retail and back to supporting our domestic tourism and hospitality sectors. Mr President, our nation has performed and outperformed all major advanced nations with a larger proportion of Australians who were in the workforce before this crisis in work today. This was due to support programs we put in place, which were only possible because we entered this crisis 12 months ago in a position of economic strength.
Senator McAllister.
Mr President, my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. This morning, Peter Van Onselen revealed that in response to Ms Higgins going public about her alleged rape in Minister Reynolds' office, that, and I quote, the Prime Minister's office has been backgrounding that her now partner has a vendetta or a gripe against the government. Mr Van Onselen labelled the tactics of the Prime Minister's office as, and I quote, grubby. Does the minister agree that backgrounding against Ms Higgins to delegitimise her experience would be grubby? And does the Morrison government accept that Ms Higgins' claims of rape and her experience of feeling pressured not to report it should be believed?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, in relation to Ms Higgins's very distressing claims of sexual assault and rape, as Minister Reynolds informed the Senate at the commencement, it has always been the intent of the government to support her and to enable her to make whatever decisions she chooses to make, and that continues to be the position of the government. It's for those reasons that Minister Reynolds and her then Chief of Staff facilitated meetings for Ms Higgins with the police in early 2019, and indeed why parliamentary services and others provided police with access to information, to the CCTV
Order.
footage within this building. Now, in relation to the claims in the first part of the Senator's question, I have no awareness of any such activity being undertaken.
Senator McAllister, a supplementary question.
Will the Prime Minister investigate the claims that his staff are backgrounding journalists against Ms Higgins? If the claims are proved, what consequences will there be for this conduct?
Senator Birmingham.
Well, Senator, through you, Mr President, Senator I will take those matters up with the Prime Minister. I am certain that he has no tolerance for such activities.
Senator McAllister, a final supplementary question.
I would appreciate
Order.
a response to my question, to my supplementary question, once you've taken it up with the Prime Minister. Yesterday, Ms Higgins said, and I quote, "The continued victim-blaming rhetoric by the Prime Minister is personally very distressing to me and countless other survivors." When will Mr Morrison stop victim-blaming and be straight about the conduct of his government?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, Mr President, the government wants nothing more than, in relation to Ms Higgins, for her to be able to make the decisions she chooses to make in relation to whether she takes these matters forward with police, and the government will provide absolutely full cooperation in that regard, as we would have and have had at any point of time in the past. We will continue to provide that support. In relation to the systemic issues in place, my office, consistent with what the Prime Minister has announced, has now reached out across all party lines, groupings and independents to arrange for discussions that I will undertake over coming days to enable us to pursue a true multi-party independent approach to ensure that across this building, regardless of the political party that an individual may work for, they can have confidence in the systems and processes that are in place to support them.
Senator Waters.
Thanks very much, President. My question is to you regarding Brittany Higgins's rape allegations. Did you or your staff tell the Prime Minister or any of his staff or any other members of the ministry that a request to DPS had been made on the 18th of April 2019 by the Sexual Assault Unit of the AFP, seeking access to the CCTV footage of the evening of Brittany Higgins's alleged rape? If so, when?
Can I commence, Senator Waters, by saying for the first time this week in this place that I struggle to find the words, be they formal or informal, to fully express my sorrow, occasionally frustration and anger at what has occurred in this workplace, the alleged sexual assault. It's occurred on my watch as a senator and indeed as a custodian at this place. At all times, I have acted to the best of my ability to assist any process that will help Brittany Higgins, whose identity I was not aware of until last Friday, find justice without further suffering and with her own ability to choose her course of action. The Speaker and I have answered a number of queries this week and issued a statement yesterday. I think senators will appreciate the building is jointly administered by the Speaker and myself. We followed the procedures. The Federal Police requested viewing of the footage. They saw that footage. With their agreement, we continued to store that footage since that time. When we received anonymous and serious allegations, we referred those to the AFP, and we then, following that, commissioned our own independent inquiry into the actions of staff in this building. Now, I think it's appropriate, I should add, to clarify that neither of the presiding officers, myself nor the Speaker, has viewed the footage. The footage in question has only been viewed by members of the AFP, authorised officials from the Department of Parliamentary Services and the independent investigator. We have not provided any footage access to any parliamentarian or member of staff. Now, I don't plan to say any more at this point because it is a courtesy to the Speaker as a joint administrator of the building that I should consult with him, and I will come back to the chamber and, if necessary, consult the authorities before I add anything in this chamber that may inadvertently interfere with an investigation underway.
Thanks very much, President. Noting your comments, I will persist with supplementary questions, and I might also ask that you answer the first question about whether you told the Prime Minister or his staff or any other members of the ministry that DPS had received a request from the assault unit of the AFP. I refer to that statement yesterday. Did you or any of your staff tell the PM or any of his staff or members of the ministry when that unnamed senator referred the correspondence to you about a serious incident in March 2020?
I will come back to the chamber after consulting with the Speaker. As I said, we jointly administer the building, and it's a courtesy and appropriate, I think, that I consult with him.
Thank you, President. Brittany Higgins has a final supplementary. Brittany Higgins has said that she was repeatedly denied access to the CCTV footage showing she and her alleged rapist entering the building and Minister Reynolds' suite. Did her request to release the footage to her ever make it to you? And if so, why was that request denied?
The footage was requested by the AFP, and the process of doing that is outlined in a policy of this place. It was quarantined and then stored for the AFP to view. As far as I am aware, there was no request from Brittany to see the footage that came to the presiding officers. But I will again come back to the chamber and correct that or provide further information. Sorry. Yes, sorry, Senator Waters.
My question was not so much did the request come directly from her as did a request on her behalf make it to you. There's a subtle but important difference there.
I received, again, I will confirm, but we have checked and I have received no request from Brittany Higgins. Or Senator Waters.
Is what I'm asking.
So, well, I'll look at the Hansard and I will come back. I think it's entirely appropriate that I be precise. Senator Patrick.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Defence and relates to the future frigate program. In June 2018, the Type 26 was announced as the basis for what we now know as the Hunter-class frigate, with claims of large-scale job creation, work for Australian industry and a schedule that was fundamental to establishing the naval shipbuilding program. Real Australian suppliers, as opposed to local shopfronts for foreign industry, remain of the view that the opportunities they expected to be able to compete for are being pushed to BAE's systems standard suppliers in the UK and shopfronts here. What action is the government taking to ensure all Australian owned and controlled suppliers are being offered full and fair access to work packages for the project?
The Minister for Defence, Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, and I thank Senator Patrick for the question, and I also thank you for the courtesy of prior notice, particularly in the circumstances. More than 1,300 Australian companies have pre-qualified for inclusion in the BAE Systems at Maritime Australia Hunter project supply chain. We already have contracts with BlueScope for Australian steel. Here are just some of the great Australian businesses working on the Hunter. Indigenous business TQCSI Yarran, InfraBuild Steel Centre, APS Adelaide Profile Services, Intertech Adelaide Inspection Services and MG Engineering. The Hunter-class frigate program will achieve a minimum of 58% Australian industry content, with a target Australian industry content of over 60%. This means Australian jobs, skills and growing our sovereign industrial capability. There are already over 1,000 Australians working on the Hunter-class frigate program, which will grow to 2,200 at the program's peak in the late 2020s. As design of the Hunter progresses, even more work packages will be released to Australian industry in both the build and in the sustainment phases. Already companies such as Voxon Photonics have won work with BAE Systems to support naval research in Australia and in the UK. But of course, our targets for Australian industry content are not set and forget. We are maximising Australian industry content across naval shipbuilding and have established a robust Australian industry assurance program to ensure that Australian businesses are afforded and affordable every possible opportunity.
Senator Patrick, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. The government mandated the use of Australian steel in the Hunter-class project, a very good decision. So it clearly can be done mandating. So what criteria must be met by the government for it to stand and intervene in respect of utilisation of non-shopfront, real Australian company industry capability?
Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and again thank you, Senator Patrick, for the question. I can say I'm incredibly proud to be part of a government that is unashamedly backing Australian industry. From 2013, this government took a stand to rebuild our Australian naval shipbuilding industry. In the 2024 structure plan, we committed to build more than 70 naval vessels right here in Australia. And a key part of strengthening our sovereign industrial base will involve working with trusted partners and suppliers, particularly where Australia is growing and developing capability. Our collaboration with international suppliers is helping build Australian capacity and also our sovereign capability. These companies are establishing uniquely Australian subsidiaries that are doing a number of things, including transferring skills and know-how to Australia, employing thousands and thousands of Australians, and exporting Australian-built cutting-edge capability to the world.
Senator Patrick, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. At budget estimates last year, despite the project having an underspend, which can be an indication that things aren't progressing as quickly as possible, the Minister and department officials advised that the project was proceeding according to schedule. Can the Minister confirm that the Hunter project is proceeding to plan and remains on schedule, both in respect of past milestones and immediately pending milestones? And can you advise on what basis that assessment is made?
Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much. And Senator Patrick, you'll be glad to know, through you, Mr President, that the answer is yes. The Hunter-class frigate project remains on track to meet government and Navy requirements. Design activities are well underway and we commenced prototyping in December 2020 on time and as planned. The next design milestone, Systems Definition Review, will occur between March and November next year, and we remain on track to cut steel in 2022.
Senator McGrath.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Businesses, Senator Cash. Could the Minister please update the Senate on the state of the labour market following today's ABS labour force figures and how the Morrison government is supporting Australia's economic recovery through strong economic policy?
The Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator McGrath for the question. And, Mr President, indeed today the labour force figures were released by the ABS for January 2021. And what they show is that the Australian labour market is continuing to recover in January 2021 from the effects of COVID-19. What we actually saw today was employment increased by 29,100 over the month. And when you look at that figure, it is not just a figure. This is Australians who are getting into work, and that is what this government is all about, putting in place the right economic policies to ensure that businesses are able to keep their employees employed, or now as we move into the next phase, bring on additional employees into their workplaces. We saw the unemployment rate decrease from 6.6% to 6.4%. And encouragingly, the increase in employment over the month of January was due entirely to a rise in full-time jobs, which surged by 59,000 in January. And in fact, Mr President, over the last 4 consecutive months now, we've seen full-time employment rise. In fact, it's a total of 277,600 to now stand at 8,820,400 in January 2021. And certainly I know Minister Payne has commented to me that encouragingly full-time employment for women rose strongly over the month, and it was up 32,100. Mr President, while employment itself fell by 872,100 between March, when Australia recorded its 100th case of COVID-19, and May, it has since increased by 813,600 over the last 8 months. We've now recovered more than 93% of the jobs that were lost so far during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Senator McGrath, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Can the minister outline how the government will continue to support our labour market to recover from the once-in-a-century economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Senator Cash.
Well, thank you, Mr President. And the employment figures released today, they do show that underlying economic strength, and they do show that the labour market in Australia is now responding and jobs are being added. But we still know, and the Prime Minister often says, things are difficult. They are still difficult for many Australians, and they will continue to be difficult for some time. But that is why the Morrison government in the first place put in place policies that enabled employers to keep their employees connected to their employment, and that was, of course, the JobKeeper policy. We also put in place the Supporting Apprentices and Trainees Wage Subsidy, which kept those apprentices and trainees on the job where we needed them to be. And now we're in 2021 and we have our $74 billion JobMaker plan. That is now going to build on the success of the programs and actually ensure that we allow businesses to bring on additional people into their workplaces. And that's what we're doing, putting in place the economic policies to support businesses and
Time
employees.
for the answer has expired. Senator McGrath, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to have devastating impacts around the world, why should Australians have confidence in the resilience of our labour market and the potential of our economic recovery?
Senator Cash.
Well, Mr President, while there is a long road ahead, as we know, Australia is well positioned. And certainly, if you look at the research by Deloitte Access Economics, they noted that Australia is just 1 out of 5 nations to enter 21 very well placed, with our economy bouncing back and actually even outperforming expectations. So what we've actually seen, job ads, ATL payroll data, business confidence and consumer confidence return to pre-COVID levels. And despite the impacts of COVID-19, the latest ABS data shows us that an additional 46,000 businesses were training over the year to June 2020. What we've also seen, deferred loan payments have resumed by households and small businesses. New dwelling approvals, new house sales, they are all increasing. And that is because the right suite of policies was put in place by the Morrison government, and that's what we'll continue to do, to keep businesses in business and people in work.
Senator Cash. Senator Kitching.
Mr President, my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham. Can the Minister confirm that from July to December last year, while Australia was in recession, NBN doled out bonuses to its executives, management and staff worth $78 million?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Well, I believe that Senator Kitching is quoting from documents published by NBN Co. As the senator would know, NBN Co is a government business enterprise established under a framework put through this parliament by the former government at the time in terms of its operation and its structure and the fact that it operates according to commercial practices and principles under those arrangements rather than standard public sector practices and principles. I'm advised that a large proportion of the number quoted in the media today goes to a very large number of staff across NBN under the terms of their employment. Under those terms that those staff negotiated, there is a base rate of pay and there is an at-risk element, and that at-risk element requires certain benchmarks to be met in terms of receipt of that at-risk component. Now, in relation to government business enterprises, I have, as the Minister for Finance, written to all GBEs, informing them of government expectations around the new wages policy that was announced on 13 November 2020, and requiring them and asking them, to the extent practicable and commensurate with their commercial and competitive circumstances and the legal frameworks within which they operate under laws of this country, that they implement a 6-month wage increase deferral decision, that they ensure new agreements only allow annual wage increases up to the percentage change of the annual seasonally adjusted wage price index, and that they consult shareholder ministers and the APS Commissioner before commencing any future wage negotiations. It's the expectation of the government that where agencies have access to bonus arrangements, they should exercise restraint to the furthest extent possible in keeping with community expectations.
Senator Kitching, a supplementary question.
And Mr President, through you, it wasn't published by NBN. It had to be dragged out of them in a response to a quan, and it was 47 days overdue. So could I ask a supplementary? How did Mr Morrison allow $78 million of taxpayer money to be spent on bonuses at a time when 1 million Australians were unemployed? Is he going to ask for the money back?
Senator Birmingham.
Well, Mr President, you know what? I suspect that if NBN Co had decided to ignore the contractual terms of employment that they have entered into with their employees, that Senator Kitching and all of the other old union reps across there would have been complaining about the fact that a government instrumentality had decided unilaterally to tear up its employment contracts. So we have a large number of NBN Co workers who are employed under terms where certain benchmarks have to be met for them to receive certain wage payments. We have simply met the legal contractual obligations. NBN Co has met those legal contractual obligations, and I have no doubt that all of the union representatives over there would have been the first to complain if a government instrumentality, if a government business enterprise had actually torn up any of those contractual arrangements between the employer and the employee.
Senator Kitching, final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President.
Order.
Given that Australia is ranked 61st in the world for fixed-line broadband, given that the cost of the NBN under the Liberal government has blown out from $29 billion to $41 billion and now $57 billion, and given that up to 238,000 premises still can't access minimum guaranteed NBN speeds as required by law, given that, does the Morrison government consider it inappropriate for NBN executives to be handing out $78 million in taxpayer-funded bonus?
Senator Birmingham.
Oh, Mr President, we've made clear that we expect government business enterprises to exercise restraint. We've made that very clear. But there is also a reality that, as I said before, those opposite would be the first to criticise, if those employers decided to ignore the contractual arrangements they had entered into with their employees. I have no doubt that if they had decided unilaterally to not deliver any of those at-risk components of payments, that NBN staff would have gone to union representatives, that those union representatives would have gone to people like you, Senator Kitching, and that you would have come here or to Senate estimates and sought to criticise the fact that employees weren't receiving what they had been contracted to receive, that we were in breach of those contractual obligations. So don't come in here with a hypocritical stance when we know full well you would have gone and argued exactly the opposite had the opposite occurred.
Order. 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 Senator Antich.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts, Senator Hume. Can the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's world-leading legislation is leading to commercial deals between news, media businesses and digital platforms?
I remind senators that the COVID rules we put in place do allow senators to speak from any seat. We put those in place. We put those in place early last year. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Antic for his question. Mr President, the Media Bargaining Code is a world-leading framework to address the fundamental bargaining power imbalance between Australian news businesses and the major digital platforms, Google and Facebook. The Morrison government has always maintained that the ideal outcome is for news media businesses and digital platforms to reach commercial deals. We welcome Google signing deals with Nine, with Seven West Media and with small publisher Junkee. Additionally, our legislation has led Google to sign a global deal with News Corp that will include not just Australian publications, but also those in the US and the UK, a sign that our legislation is in fact world-leading. But we know that without the threat of the code and its binding final offer arbitration, there would be no deals at all. In stark contrast to Google, Facebook has disappointingly shown to block Australian news and information services on its site. Facebook will need to think very carefully about what this means for its reputation and its standing. It seems that Facebook is taking a decision to remove credible news sources from its platform, callously booting community and public health organisations off the platform in that process. It's basically saying to Australians that if you're looking for credible news, then Facebook is not the place to look for it. The government has consistently said that we wish Facebook and Google to remain operating in Australia, but we also expect them at all times to comply with laws that have been passed by the democratically elected Parliament of Australia and indeed with bipartisan support for that legislation.
Senator Antic, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, how will these deals support the future of public interest journalism?
Senator Hume.
Mr President, the Code will support a diverse and sustainable Australian news media sector by requiring those digital platforms to pay fairly for the content that they use. Australian news media businesses can reinvest in the public interest journalism that is so vital to our economy and to our democracy. This is particularly important in regional Australia, where many papers have ceased printing or have closed altogether. Regional media businesses will be able to seek remuneration through a range of options, including standard offers, where digital platforms can make standard offers to news media businesses, and this provides a way for smaller media businesses to avoid the often timely and costly bargaining and arbitration processes. Or through collective bargaining and collectively engaging in arbitration, where the digital platforms allowing for cost and resource sharing between smaller and regional media businesses.
Senator Antic, final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, what other measures has the government put in place to support the future of public interest journalism in Australia?
Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you again, Senator Antic. The News Media Bargaining Code is not the only measure that the Morrison government has put in place to support the future of public interest journalism in Australia. The government has steadfastly supported our media industry, including through the $50 million PING program to support public interest journalism delivered by commercial television, radio and newspapers, all in regional Australia. In addition to that, the $5 million to the Australian Associated Press Limited Newswire under the PING program, $5 million from the Regional and Small Publishers Innovation Fund to support 43 different small metropolitan and regional publishers, and a 12-month waiver of spectrum tax for commercial television and radio broadcasters worth $41 million to the sector. And on top of that, reforms to the regulation of Australian content on free-to-air television to streamline and simplify drama, documentaries and children's content
Senator
obligations.
Hume. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Payne. According to data from the Tourism and Transport Forum, the tourism sector continues to lose approximately $8 billion a month. It is now 38 days until JobKeeper ends. How much longer will the Minister make these businesses wait to outline what support the Morrison government will provide once JobKeeper ends?
The Minister representing the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And we have spent some time in the chamber discussing matters relating to tourism and the government's very serious interest in—
Order. 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 Order on my left.
Very serious commitment to the industry, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 impact on the industry. We've spoken, Mr President, about JobKeeper itself and the small business cash payments as well, which has sustained hundreds of thousands of tourism businesses and jobs across Australia. And I think, Mr President, and the feedback that I have heard in regional New South Wales is that JobKeeper support has been extremely important for the industry during the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are also, as I've said before, providing further targeted assistance to help the tourism sector rebound, to support as many jobs as possible. And that is in addition to the record funding for Tourism Australia, which I've also spoken about before in the chamber. In terms of our plan to create jobs, to rebuild our economy, including the observations the Leader of the Government in the Senate made earlier in question time, that includes helping to secure the future of Australia's tourism industry. That's why we introduced the Recovery for Regional Tourism Fund, Mr President, which is about boosting tourism in 9 regions heavily reliant on international tourism. It's about delivering those tailored assistance measures to help tourism businesses pivot to the domestic market. Those applications are still open, Mr President, until the 30th of September.
Order.
That is a current program. There is funding earmarked for tourism infrastructure under the Building Better Regions Fund, $100 million in that fund. That is about supporting the supply of new quality tourism infrastructure to drive that visitation in the regions. We are also providing, through the Regional Recovery Partnerships program, Mr President, another $100 million of funding
time
there.
For the answer has expired. Senator Brown, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. The Tourism and Transport Forum also report over 470,000 direct tourism jobs have already been lost, with modelling suggesting as many as 300,000 more to go when the Morrison government cuts off support. Why is the minister delaying further support when workers are losing their livelihoods right now?
Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President. What the government has been focused on are those initiatives and continues to be focused on those initiatives that I have just described to the chamber, Mr President. In terms of the Relief and Recovery Fund as well, it also has components which include a focus on terrorism, whether that is conservation work and infrastructure upgrades. I've seen those in place myself, granted myself in Western Sydney, particularly in the Blue Mountains. Fee waivers in marine and national parks, funding allocated to arts-related organisations to help these important drivers and contributors to the visitor economy remain open. Funding for the Export Market Development Grant recipients, including those in the tourism sector, for the 2019-20 financial year. We are very conscious, Mr President, that JobKeeper has supported a large proportion of the tourism industry, and we are considering, as I have said before, the best way we can support economic recovery in the tourism sector when JobKeeper ends, as we know, at the end of March.
Expired. Senator Brown, a final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. What faith can the thousands of Australians employed in the tourism industry have in a government that can't outline vital support in a pandemic but can find money for sports frauds?
Senator Payne.
So, Mr President, I think it is actually
Order.
It is actually really unfortunate, Mr President, that when the government has worked in good faith with the industry, when the government has worked in good faith with the sector across Australia, and we are well aware of their concerns in relation to JobKeeper, but that good faith work, Mr President, has driven our provision of funding for the regional recovery partnerships, our provisional funding for the Recovery for Regional Tourism Fund, the work under the Building Better Regions Fund, Mr President, all of those things, absolutely because of our engagement with the sector, Mr President, and for Senator Brown to purport to say in this place that the government has not done that is false and should not be allowed to stand.
Senator McDonald.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management, Senator Ruston. Can the Minister please update the Senate on how the Morrison government is strengthening disaster resilience of North Queensland?
The Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator McDonald for her question. And clearly, as a Northern Queenslander, she understands the importance of disaster recovery in her home state of Queensland. So we all know, Senator McDonald, that the North Queensland cops more than its fair share of natural disasters, and I'm sure everybody in this place remembers the absolute devastating impact of the flood events in 2019, which left large areas of the state underwater. There is no doubt that all governments have a role to play, and that includes the federal government, in ensuring Australia's preparedness and response to natural disasters. And that's why this government, the Morrison-McCormack government, is investing in resilience measures that will ensure our regions, as well as our urban areas, are in a better position to be able to respond to any future natural disasters. And this includes the $260 million in joint funding with the states and territories to implement the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework. This framework sets out what we need to do to reduce disaster risk, both now and into the future. The government has also committed $88 million for a world-class disaster resilience and research centre. The centre will provide all tiers of government with advice regarding disaster mitigation and resilience building. And the government has also committed $25.9 million to the National Aerial Firefighting Centre, a centre that will coordinate our fleet of aerial firefighting specialised equipment that's able to support our states and territories, a matter that I'll acknowledge that Senator Griff in this place has a very, very strong interest. But the Morrison-McCormack government is absolutely committed to supporting Queenslanders, as we are across the rest of Australia, to prepare for, unfortunately, what will be the next disaster, because we know that disasters will continue to occur.
Order. Order. Order on my right. Senator McDonald.
How is the Australian government supporting our state and territory counterparts to build back better and continue our economic recovery?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, clearly the most important thing is that we continue as a federal government to collaborate with the states and territories so that we have a united response when it comes to disasters and disaster recovery arrangements. Often these arrangements are going to depend on the individual circumstances of the particular disaster, because we know that the Commonwealth will be prepared and has often paid up to 75% of the total cost of the disaster. But under these arrangements, states and territories have the ability to be able to build back more resilient buildings and services and public assets to make sure that they're in a better position to be able to withstand future disasters. I mean, a classic example of this, Senator McDonald, was after Tropical Cyclone Debbie that we funded a $1.85 million upgrade for the sea wall at Shute Harbour, so that it's able to withstand the tidal impacts of future disasters into the future.
Time for the answers expired. Senator McDonald, a final supplementary question.
Is the minister aware of any resilience programs that provide direct, tangible benefits to consumers?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, the government is working with states and territories, Senator McDonald, to protect Australian communities, and one such collaboration that we're working with the Queensland Government on is the Queensland Household Resilience Program. This program assists eligible householders, particularly in coastal parts of Queensland, to make practical improvements to their properties so that they can withstand and reduce the impacts of cyclones on their properties. But it also has the added advantage of having a downward impact on the price of insurance premiums. This $21.25 million program has helped consumers reduce their premiums, some of them up to over $300 a year, and we've also worked to strengthen 1,750 houses in that region to make sure that they are better prepared to withstand the impacts of future disasters. So this Queensland Household Resilience Program addresses the very issues to which, Senator McDonald, that you are asking this Senate to be informed about.
Senator Ruston. Senator Chisholm.
Thanks, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Home Affairs, Senator Reynolds. Did Minister Dutton disclose to the Prime Minister that he received a political donation from the National Retailers Association a week before he asked the Department of Home Affairs to fast-track the consideration of the association's almost $1 million grant? If not, why not?
The Minister representing the Minister for Home Affairs, Senator Reynolds.
If I could ask Mr President if I could have indulgence to answer this on Monday. I think I'd be in a better position to answer this on Monday. I will, if you can just give me a minute. Or can I take it on notice?
Yep.
Thank you.
So should Senator Chisholm, Senator Wong, I was about to. Yep.
President, by leave, I wonder perhaps if the minister is not in a position to deal with this, perhaps if Senator Chisholm wishes, he could address the question to the Prime Minister. Sorry, the Minister representing the Prime Minister.
I'm happy with the leave of the chamber to allow Senator Birmingham to address the question. Would you like it asked again? Senator Chisholm.
Thanks, Mr President. Did Minister Dutton disclose to the Prime Minister that he received a political donation from the National Retailers Association a week before he asked the Department of Home Affairs to fast-track the consideration of the association's almost $1 million grant? If not, why not?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Mr President, I know that these issues have been explored in this place with Senator Reynolds, as well as in the other place during the course of the week. And there seems to be a desperate attempt to seek to draw some connection that just does not exist in this regard, Mr President. Does not exist. The National Retailers Association has donated to both sides of politics. To both sides of politics. The Labor member for Griffith received donations from the National Retailers Association in the same financial year as
Senator
Mr Dutton's campaign.
On a point of order.
Point of order, direct relevance. The issue is not a political donation in its own right. The issue is a political donation being made to somebody who then fast-tracks consideration of a taxpayer grant. A taxpayer grant. I'd ask the minister to be directly relevant to the question.
I've allowed you to restate the question, Senator Wong. I will listen carefully to the minister's answer. He has 1:20 remaining. Order. Order. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. Mr President, the National Retailers Association applied for funding, I'm advised, for a Protecting Crowded Places project to assist retailers to deter, detect, delay and respond to a terrorist attack. Noting the events that had occurred, I do not accept the interjections from Senator Keneally in relation to the notion of a conflict, Mr President. Mr Dutton processed this application from the National Retailers Association in accordance with normal practices.
Senator Birmingham. Senator Chisholm, a supplementary question.
Yes, Mr President. Has Minister Dutton received any other donations from the National Retailers Association? If so, has he disclosed these donations to the Prime Minister or his office?
Senator Birmingham.
Mr President, I'm confident that Mr Dutton will have met all disclosure requirements in relation to donations or in relation to any other commitments in relation to the ministerial standard and expectations set around the ministerial standard. Mr Dutton, I'm advised, in relation to the grant, asked the Department of Home Affairs to consider the proposal by the National Retailers Association that had been lodged by them, and I understand asked the Department of Finance to cost it to ensure it was suitable and value for money. It was a proposal to simply make sure that Australians in a retail environment—
Senator Birmingham. Senator Wong on a point of order.
A point of order, direct relevance, and I accept that this is a question that has been directed to the Leader of the Government in the circumstances. I would ask him, though, on both this one and on the primary, they went to disclosure to the Prime Minister. I'd ask him either to be directly relevant or, if he is not in a position to do so, to take those issues on notice, because they go directly to the issue we are asking about. Were these issues disclosed to the Prime Minister?
I've allowed you to restate the point, Senator Birmingham. I'll call Senator Birmingham to continue.
Mr President, I'm happy to provide clarification on points of fact to the chamber, and will seek to do so, Mr President. But it is also a point of fact, Mr President, that Mr Dutton went through proper processes in receipt of the grant application from the National Retailers Association, in costing it properly,
Senator Birmingham,
and proper approval arrangements.
Expired. Senator Chisholm, a final supplementary question.
Yes. Has Minister Dutton given discretionary grants to any other organisations or individuals who have donated to his election campaign or the Queensland Liberal National Party?
Senator Birmingham.
No, Mr President, I will take the question on notice insofar as there are any details that need to be provided to the chamber about grant processes, disclosures that have been made. I am quite confident that Mr Dutton has met all disclosure obligations under political fundraising guidelines, that he will have, Mr President, met ministerial standards that are required to be met around disclosures, but most particularly that in administering public funds as a Minister of the Crown, he has sought to deliver good public policy outcomes for Australia. And those good public policy outcomes for Australia include, Mr President, keeping Australians safe. And keeping Australians safe, be they in crowded places, in retail environments, in the type of locations, Mr President, that are crucially important in terms of the number of Australians who congregate, the threats to those Australians and the importance, Mr President, of ensuring that businesses are well equipped to operate in safe environments and localities. Mr President, I ask that further questions be placed on notice, and I seek leave to make a brief statement, please.
Leave is granted.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank the chamber. Mr President, I just wish to alert the chamber to some resourcing decisions being taken by the government around the employment assistance program. As senators all realise, some very challenging and difficult issues have been discussed across this building this week that may cause a number of staff to feel distress or need to reach out for support services. As people are aware, we have a long-running employment assistance program in place. I want to restate the importance of people being able to access that via the usual telephone line that is available. I also want to advise the Senate that at the beginning of next week there will be a number of councillors made available on-site in Parliament House for individuals to be able to access, and that I will make sure that all staff and officers are provided with details on these matters and urge and encourage senators to access those services themselves if need be, as well as those provided by the Parliament, and of course to make sure that their staff are aware of those services and the confidentiality provisions that exist around those services. I thank the Senate.
Senator McAllister.
Thanks, Mr President. Understanding Order 74.5a, I seek an explanation from the Minister for Women, Senator Payne, as to why questions numbered 363 to 399 and 13 to 21, which I placed on notice in the Finance and Public Administration Committee main budget estimates round in October 2020, remain unanswered.
Minister. Madam Deputy President, and in response to Senator McAllister's standing order question, I have undertaken with Senator McAllister to seek further information on this. It is the genuine understanding of my office that questions on notice to us had been responded to. In fact, it is not my intention whatsoever not to respond to those questions. If it is a genuine misunderstanding, I undertake to provide them as fast as I possibly can, and if there is an administrative issue, then also to address that.
Senator McAllister.
I move that the Senate take note of the explanation. I appreciate the undertaking that's been provided just now by the Minister. But this is a misunderstanding that should not have arisen in the first place and could have been resolved yesterday. It is a normal courtesy in this place that if one is seeking an explanation from a minister about a failure to answer questions on notice, one notifies that minister's office. My office did telephone the office of Senator Payne yesterday, and yesterday afternoon at 2 to 3, around this time yesterday, her office rang my office to indicate that the answers to the questions had been tabled. They haven't been. Inquiries with the committee confirm that they have not been received, and I understand that the committee has undertaken further due diligence to confirm that, and that is why I'm raising it this afternoon. Part of the problem is that this is, of course, quite consistent with a broader lack of transparency from this government. In the first instance, many of these questions that were taken on notice were simple, factual questions. They were capable of being answered in the room. But in this estimates round, they were taken on notice again and again and again and again. In fact, the fact that there are even 40 questions that were taken on notice in a period of questioning that only went for under an hour is quite staggering. And they're just the questions taken on notice in response to me, because other senators asked questions, and those questions are doubtless unanswered as well. I haven't checked. But why are so many questions being taken on notice by officials working for this government? Because it is a clear pattern over a long period of time that the willingness of officials to answer questions that they fear may be inconvenient to their bosses has completely increased. And what we have is a situation where questions are not being answered in the room and normal questions of fact are unable to be explored in the estimates process. Then when responses are provided, months later, we get a response that maybe mentions in passing one or two words from the original question, but in no way engages with the underlying premise, certainly doesn't rise to the level of providing an answer that would be understood by ordinary people as meeting the basic standards of accountability from a government. And now we've got this fun development, which is that we simply just don't answer questions at all. Now, it is possible, almost certain, I think, that the Office for Women are understaffed. There just simply aren't enough people to do the work. But we don't know that. We don't know that because one of the questions that remains unanswered is a request for the org chart. Seriously, why could the org chart not have been provided in the room on the day? Another is a request for the total number of employees in the Office for Women, question 364. Unable to be answered in the room, apparently unable to be answered now. Maybe they're plugging the gap with contractors. Well, we don't know that either. Question 365 asks for details of labour hire workers and contractors, and that also remains unanswered. What possible, credible reason could there be for the delay in providing these answers? Is there a delicate political response that requires finessing by the Minister's office? In fact, a large number of the questions that I remain unanswered are simple questions, very factual questions, and they should have been responded to with simple factual answers. Question 366, has the Office for Women outsourced any of its work to external organisations? If yes, how much funding has been allocated? It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Pretty straightforward administrative question. Should have been answered in the room. Question 367. Can the Office for Women provide a list of roundtables conducted by the Minister, including dates, locations and attendees? Pretty straightforward. Question 371. How much funding has been given to the 6 women's alliances? How many times has the Minister met with them? Question 372. What role did the Office for Women play in Australia's campaign for the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women? I would have thought that was something they'd like to talk about, not able to be answered. Question 378. Please provide a list of meetings the Minister for Women has had with stakeholders such as women's groups or service providers in the last 6 months. Question 387. Please provide a list of the stakeholders consulted about the 2020 Women's Economic Security Statement. How about this one? And this one should have been very, very easy. 377, please list the media interviews the Minister for Women completed regarding the 2020 Women's Economic Security Statement. It wouldn't have taken long, Senator Ayres, that is correct. These are questions that would have been actually very easy to answer for a minister who was doing the work of meeting with stakeholders and consulting on a policy. And the fact that the minister has delayed answering these questions suggests that maybe the answers are embarrassing. The thing is, it's not clear what the minister would have to say about any of these issues in any event, because it's really not apparent what work the Office for Women has actually been doing. Question 34 is an important one. Regarding the next national plan to reduce violence against women and their children, who is conducting the next consultation phase? When will it begin? What has been done so far? And the reason I say it's important is because we are hearing concerns from the sector that the government is not intending to conduct formal consultations as part of the preparation of the next national plan. Instead, the government is considering relying on the submissions that were made to a House of Representatives inquiry. Yes, it was question 370. The Office for Women said it was developing guidance material for other departments so they can identify the gender impact of their policies. When was this work done? Who is it being given to? Can we see it? Unanswered. It'd be nice to know, though, wouldn't it? Question 373. What work is being undertaken by the Office for Women to address the gender pay gap? Core business, you'd think. Question 374, what work is being undertaken by the Office for Women to address vocational training for women? Question 375, what work is being undertaken by the Office for Women to address the super gap? Question 376, what work is being undertaken to address the rising crisis of homeless women over the age of 55? We haven't received a response to these questions. But I know that the answer is, and it's not very much. We'll get an answer that is carefully couched, a nice set of words referencing some policy process going on somewhere else in the government. But the real answer, and it's tragic, is that the Office for Women isn't asked to do very much by this government. Capable people not being utilised against a problem, gender equality, that ought to be something that people are talking about. The Minister presides over this organisation, the Office for Women, that has been denuded of numbers and expertise by systematic neglect and marginalisation under this government. And one of the most telling manifestations of this marginalisation is the failure of other departments to consult with the Office for Women about the gender impacts of crucial policies over the last couple of years. In answer to a question from the COVID-19 Select Committee, the Office for Women confirmed that between March and April 2020, the Office for Women did not brief on early access to superannuation, did not brief on the JobKeeper program, did not brief on the Job Seeker program in advance of government decisions on these issues. The Minister demonstrated no real concern about the lack of input she and the Office for Women had when these very significant economic decisions were being made. And she told me at estimates that where it is appropriate, that's her quote, the Office for Women would be invited to engage. Using the example of job seeker payments, the Minister reminded us that these payments are not made in any gendered way whatsoever, and the additional payments made in the context of COVID-19 have been equally applied to women and men. Well, they might have been equally applied to women and men, but that does not mean that the impact of these payments is the same for women as it is for men. Nobody in any part of this government has completed any analysis about policy design on this and other aspects of the coronavirus response package and the extent to which it met or did not meet the economic needs of women. Which is quite surprising, isn't it, if you think about how much public discussion there was about the impact of COVID-19, the disproportionate impact on women, women's employment and women's financial well-being. And so I asked at estimates. Question 384, how many women will benefit from the measures included in the 2020 Women's Economic Security Statement? Question 386, how will the Office for Women measure progress on the statement? Question 399, is WGEA undertaking any economic or financial analysis of COVID-19 and its effects and impacts on the gender pay gap? If not, why not? Again, no response. But the truth is that everyone in this chamber knows what the answer is. It's because this is a government that is indifferent to the economic needs of women, and they demonstrate it time and time and time again in their contempt, their visible contempt, for people who hear or in the estimates hearings raise these issues. This is a government that leaves women behind.
Thank you. Senator McAllister. Senator Rice.
Acting Deputy President, pursuant to Standing Order 74.5, I also ask the Minister representing the Prime Minister for an explanation as to why an answer has not been provided to question on notice number 69.
Okay, just a moment, Senator Rice. I was just listening to see if it's on the same matter. It isn't. So I'm just going to put Senator McAllister's matter and then I'll come back to you. So the question is that the motion to take note moved by Senator McAllister be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Against? I believe the ayes have it. Please continue, Senator Rice.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm asking the Minister representing the Prime Minister why an answer has not been provided to question on notice number 69, asked during the budget estimates hearing of the Finance and Public Administration Legislation Committee asked of the Department of Prime Minister Cabinet on the 20th of October relating to a letter from former Minister Mackenzie to the Prime Minister about the Community Sports Infrastructure Program.
Thank you. Minister.
Thanks, Deputy President. Just on a point of order initially, can I clarify from the Senator if this is a question that was asked by Senator Rice or by another senator?
Thank you, Minister. Senator Rice?
Yes, it was asked by myself.
Yes. Thank you, Minister.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy President. I thank Senator Rice. That didn't necessarily concur with my understanding, but it was only quite late into question time that at least I received information about your intent to query on this matter. I don't have details to be able to provide the senator at present, but I will seek to find an explanation and the answer to that question from the relevant department and provide it to the chamber at a later time.
Senator Rice.
Thank you. I move the Senate take note of that explanation. So, look, essentially what I'm taking note today, it was actually a very simple yes-no question. It's a lack of response to a question on notice from estimates about letters between then Minister Mackenzie and the Prime Minister in relation to the Community Sports Infrastructure Grants program. And I asked whether the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet about whether they had seen the letter or a copy of the letter that former Minister Mackenzie wrote to the Prime Minister in late 2018 after they had met together, seeking an expansion of funding for the Community Sport Infrastructure Grants program. And I asked whether the Department and the Secretary were aware of that letter at the time it was sent. What I was told in estimates was that they didn't believe so, but that they would need to check to make sure that the answer was accurate. And 5 months on from October, we don't yet know whether that answer was accurate. I mean, the question's overdue. It's now February. But in fact, and the reason why I wanted to bring this to the attention of the Senate today is because it goes to the complete lack of transparency and accountability and the unwillingness to furnish all of the information that this Senate needs over the whole process of the Community Sports Grants program. And this issue as to when the department became aware actually is quite a critical one, because if the department in fact hadn't known, as it seems that they did not know, of the letters between the Minister for Sports and the Prime Minister seeking an expansion of funding, well, it actually goes very much to the whole point that we have been making about this sports rorts program, that this was not a standard budget process, that the decision to expand the program and the decision to change who was receiving grants from the recipients that had been recommended by Sports Australia was a political process. I mean, the Prime Minister has claimed during the whole 12 months that we have been focused on sports rorts that the decision to expand the program from $30 million to $100 million was a standard budget process. Well, if that was the case, then surely the letters would actually have shown up in the parliamentary document management system with a date, and the department would have known about it, and they would have responded to those letters. But the fact that the department didn't appear to know about the letters, which we need to have confirmed, it explains why, in fact, the department only learned about the letters more than a year later, during the Gatchins review, when we had the review into all of the pork barrelling that occurred to help the government win the election. I mean, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, what it appears is that they only learnt about these letters, the letter, during that review. It's worth noting that the Gatchins review, in fact, was the sole examination of this issue by the government. But what they told us in estimates, which it appears, we don't know whether it's accurate or not because I haven't had the response to this question on notice, It looks like they didn't have the letters when the exchange occurred because it was a political process. The increase in funding approved by the Prime Minister was a political decision based on the number of projects in marginal and targeted seats that could be funded in the months leading up to the 2019 election. I mean, it's now been more than a year since the Audit Office released their report on the Community Sports Infrastructure Grants program. More than a year that this Senate has been trying to piece together all the bits of information to find out exactly what went on. It's more than a year since we woke up to the news and we were horrified to hear that the government had taken a community sports program with applications from hundreds of community sports groups and turned it into a political rort that was being run out of the Prime Minister's office. I mean, in not answering this question, there have been umpteen questions over that whole year that have not been answered. We've had the government, the Liberal Party, trying to hold things up, to slow things down and refusing to provide key documents to the Senate Select Committee. Not answering this question is just another one of the questions that haven't been answered. We haven't had meaningful answers to my other questions about the meeting between the Prime Minister and former Minister Mackenzie in November 2018 when the funding was expanded. I asked questions just last Friday of former Minister Mackenzie about the relationship between her office and the Prime Minister's office and the involvement of the Prime Minister's office, and got unbelievable answers from Minister Mackenzie. And the evidence that we do have that really we need to have ratified, we need to have the corroborating evidence that we know that the government is holding, that they are withholding from us. But the evidence that we do have is clear evidence that the Prime Minister actually did know about the use of the marginal and targeted electorates before the first grants went out the door, and that the Prime Minister, in meeting with Senator Mackenzie about expanding funding for the program, that a key part of the pitch from Senator Mackenzie was how many grants could go to marginal and targeted electorates. And we also know that the Prime Minister was closely involved in the decision-making for the program. We know that there were hundreds of emails and copies of spreadsheets that went backwards and forwards with changes to which community clubs were going to be funded. And we know that the Prime Minister's office was coordinating across multiple programs because, in fact, the rorts don't stop at the Community Sports Infrastructure program. Instead, there were projects that were being identified by Liberal Party campaign headquarters, and they were trying to work out which programs they could jam them into, whether it was the Community Sports Infrastructure program, whether it was the Female Facilities and Water Safety program. Where could they get the money from to fund the projects that they thought were going to be of political benefit for them? Coordinating between multiple offices to make sure that their election wish lists were being funded by taxpayer funds. But despite this clear evidence that the Prime Minister knew about the use of marginal and targeted electorates, despite the evidence that we have that his office was intimately involved in decision-making, we have yet to see any accountability from the Prime Minister or his office. I mean, the Gaetjens report was basically a cover-up report commissioned by a former Liberal Chief of Staff. It didn't even cover the Prime Minister's role or the role of his office. Instead, they found a technicality to force former Minister Mackenzie out as a scapegoat without looking at the role that the Prime Minister played. And we've also learnt over the last year that an independent statutory agency, the Australian Sports Commission, is being forced to clear their answers to questions from this parliament through the office of the current Sports Minister. I mean, given how wide this rort goes, it seems incredible that the Liberals are trying to undermine the independence of a statutory body as part of their cover-up. But instead of facing up to their failures, instead of coming clear, instead of giving answers to all the questions that we've asked, instead of doing that, they've doubled down on their cover-up and they've made Senator Mackenzie the scapegoat for their failures. And then the fact that they have made Senator Mackenzie suffer for a rort that was overseen by the Prime Minister's office, it actually goes to the sexism that is inherent in the Liberal Party. And it shows how desperate they are to avoid linking the whole sports rorts affair to the Prime Minister. I mean, Senator Mackenzie, she's a hard-working and passionate politician. I mean, she and I disagree on a lot of things, including particularly about what we should do about Australia's forests. But I think it's fundamentally unfair to her that the Prime Minister has made her take the fall for a program that has got his fingerprints all over it. We have got so many other scandals that this government has been embroiled in since they came in this term of office. We had Minister Dutton, who was embroiled in getting visas for au pairs, and we've more recently seen Minister Dutton embroiled in his own grants program, rorting. We had Minister Tudge delaying the release of asylum seeker. And a federal court judge has found that Minister Tudge has engaged in criminal conduct which was disgraceful. We had Minister Roberts, who was one of several ministers who oversaw the debacle that was robo-debt. We had Minister Sukkar, who was caught up in really, really serious questions about branch stacking. And then, of course, Minister Taylor, who has got more scandals than I can even remember, and certainly that I've got time to mention. I mean, providing doctored documents to journalists and the grassland scandal, to name a few. But all of these ministers, they've survived. The common theme through this, if you're a man in the Liberal Party, then you can expect to experience a major scandal and the Prime Minister will cover for you. But if you're a woman who can be made to take the fall for the Prime Minister, well then he'll force you to resign and pretend that it was over the membership of a shooting club. So, I mean, Senator Mackenzie's got my sympathy. She and I disagree on a lot of things, but I think she's had a pretty rough go from the Prime Minister, and she deserves better from him than to be made the scapegoat for a program that has got his fingerprints all over it. And it's particularly concerning. And again, you know, we don't have all the information. The information is being withheld from this Senate. But it's particularly concerning is what the evidence suggests, that it might have been the Prime Minister's office that asked Mackenzie's office to get the electorate data and analyse it. I mean, we don't have the full emails and the documents. But it's entirely possible, given the discomfort from Mackenzie's staff, that there was pressure on them from the Prime Minister's office to source the electorate data that underpinned the whole sports rorts scandal and apply their marginal seat strategy. And if so, it's especially tragic that former Minister Mackenzie has been made to take the fall for a rort that was forced onto her by the Prime Minister. So, look, I look forward to getting an answer to my question today, but there are some other answers that we require as well. There are steps that the Prime Minister must take to make this right with Australians. What we need, there's a whole long list of documents that need to be provided to this Senate and to the Australian public. That includes the full and unredacted Gaetjens report, the legal advice as to whether former Minister Mackenzie actually had the authority to be the decision-maker about this sports rorts program, the talking points prepared by Minister Mackenzie's office ahead of her meeting with the Prime Minister, and the multiple letters between Minister Mackenzie and the Prime Minister in relation to this program. This is the transparency that we need. We need answers to all of these things and to unanswered questions on notice. And more importantly, the Prime Minister should apologise to the Australian people, and specifically to the sports clubs that missed out. We expect more from our leaders, and the Australian people deserve more. And to add to that apology, the government should immediately fund those clubs that missed out, that put in their hundreds of hours and the tens of thousands of dollars in preparing their applications. They are a club that should be funded, that they have been rorted. And we've got a bill before the Senate, the Level Playing Field Bill, that could be debated today, and the government should support it. And more importantly, so that this just doesn't come on, the cover-up, the lack of transparency, the rorting continues, what we need to have in this place, and what we need to have support from all sides of government, is support for a federal independent commission against corruption with teeth. And again, because of the work of the Greens, there was a Greens bill that passed this Senate, and it's ready to be voted on today in the other place. And the Liberals could make a real difference to transparency, to stop hiding behind unanswered questions, unreleased documents, and make a real difference to accountability. And we urge them to support our bill or a bill that's equally as strong for a federal ICAC with teeth? I mean, it's easy to forget, when you're talking about an unanswered question on notice, that the whole issue of the lack of transparency and the lack of accountability, it has consequences. It matters. It has impacts on everyday Australians. And that's why I am keeping on about this a year later. I mean, in the case of sports rorts, what this corrupted grants process resulted in was that organisations who should have received funding, they missed out, while other projects were funded not on their merits, but because the government thought it would help their chances of winning those targeted or marginal electorates. And then they were able to fund them, and then for those organisations to crow about the government in doing so. So look, I think I really call upon the government to come clean, to stop covering up, to support ordinary Australians, to support the clubs that missed out, because the people of Australia deserve better. The people of Australia deserve better than the scapegoating of the women around you and your responsibility, your refusal to take responsibility, Prime Minister. We ask the Prime Minister to answer the outstanding questions, apologise and to do the right thing.
Thank you, Senator Rice. Is this on the Senator Rice matter? Yes, it is. Thank you, Senator Farrell.
Yeah. Look, can I indicate the support of the opposition to the objectives of Senator Rice in this regard? We've worked very closely with the Greens on what they call the so-called sports rorts grants scheme, and I'd like to, I think, reiterate. I think Senator Rice summarised it very accurately. This was an example of a government who started out by saying, look, we need to spend all of this money in sports. We need to have a set of criteria that sporting clubs around this country can look at, and they can make an assessment. Do we fit into this category? Do we meet this criteria? And if they do, then they can put in an application. And the assumption always was, by every sporting club that I've had the pleasure to have discussed this issue with, the assumption always was that this system was on the level, that if you put in an application, it would be judged on its merits. And if the merits justified it, then you would get a grant in accordance with what you were seeking. That was the whole assumption of this program. The government went to the election. Of course, it was very well taken up because, of course, this government spent very little on infrastructure in community sporting places. But the assumption was, if you had a good application, it would be assessed fairly by the relevant independent public servants, and you would then get awarded a grant based on merit. And of course, that's what happened to start with. So Sport Australia assessed these programs against a set of criteria. Often the criteria related to female sporting requirements, because of course there's been a boom, whether you're talking about Aussie rules football or ordinary football or cricket or rugby or union. Didn't matter what you were talking about, cricket. There'd been a boom in female sports participation in this country, and sporting clubs just hadn't managed to catch up. So the government latched onto this. The government saw that there was a problem, led people to believe that if you put in a genuine application, that application would be judged on its merits. But of course that isn't what happened. The exact opposite of that is what happened. The government and the minister at the time took these applications, completely ignored the categories and the classifications that Sport Australia had attributed to these, and replaced them in the lead up to the election with grants that went to those seats that either were the most vulnerable in terms of government seats, or they were seats which the government was trying to win off either Labor or an independent. So specifically targeted. This was pork barrelling on an industrial scale. We'd never ever seen this sort of pork barrelling in this country. Now, of course, a whole lot of things happened about 12 months ago as a result of this, and of course the minister at the time, Senator Mackenzie, was, I'd say, the fall guy. I suppose she was the fall woman. She lost her spot in the ministry, not because of the industrial scale pork barrelling, you might remember, Deputy President, but for a minor technicality that she had not declared that she was a member of a club to which she'd given a grant. Now, of all the things that occurred during that time, that was the smallest of all of the breaches of integrity that took place throughout that time. And of course, she took the fall. Now, she had an opportunity last week to set the record straight, and she had the opportunity to explain to the Australian people exactly what happened in the interactions between her office and the Prime Minister's office. She had the opportunity, I'm talking Senator Mackenzie now, she had the opportunity of making it clear, I think, that the Prime Minister's office was up to its neck in the allocation of these grants program. I know you're surprised about that, Deputy President, and I know it comes as a shock that this Prime Minister could be engaged in that sort of activity. But there is no other conclusion that you can reach. If Senator Mackenzie, and I believe her, if Senator Mackenzie says, look, I didn't rort this system, it wasn't me who was making all these decisions in respect of grants, then who was it? And we know from all the emails that are gradually getting dribbled out bit by bit, and of course if the government responds appropriately to Senator Rice's applications, we'll get some more information, because we're not going to give up on this. The Australian people deserve to know what went wrong here, what went on and what went wrong. We've now seen it in a whole lot of other grant applications, programs. It's starting to look systemic, Deputy President, and again I know you'll be shocked that this government would engage in that sort of systemic rorting of grant programs in this country. But we're now seeing it in a whole lot of other programs. But it all started with the so-called sports rorts affair, and we need to get to the bottom of this. The government has to come clean, and in particular the Prime Minister, his office has to come clean and say, what was their role in this process? We've heard about all of the colour coding. Minister Mackenzie says there were a whole lot of colour coding documents. Well, if that's true, and I believe it's true, the ANOA, Mr Brian Boyd, done a terrific job, I might add. Forensic in a way that you don't often see. He's tracked down bit by bit, inch by inch, all of this industrial scale pork barrelling that went on by this government. But we haven't got to the bottom of it yet. We will. We're not giving up. The government thinks that the pandemic will overshadow all of these things. But sooner or later, the pandemic will pass, Senator Betts. You know that. You know that. I can see you smiling because you know what I'm saying is exactly right. The pandemic will pass and the Australian people will come back to demanding what is their right. And their right in this circumstances is to know what went on. How was it that the Prime Minister of this country was so able to rort this program in such a way that the funding which should have gone to clubs that genuinely deserved to be rewarded because of the projects that they were putting forward, because of the effort that all of their volunteers... Don't forget, Deputy President, most of the people who worked in these clubs that scored highly on this project were full of volunteers who'd spent their nights and weekends preparing these applications to make sure that they put absolutely the best possible foot forward in terms of applying for these generous grants, hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money. Imagine how they felt cheated when they discovered they scored highly, 90, 95, good projects. I can give you an example of one in my home state of South Australia, the South Adelaide Football Club, a fine club, one of the early clubs, SANFL clubs in South Australia, an earlier adopter of female sports participation in South Australia. Of course, you'll have known this, Deputy President, how successful the Adelaide Crows football team has been at the national level in the AFL. 2 of the first 3 premierships have been won by that side. And of course, this South Adelaide Football Club was a feeder into the Adelaide Crows football team. That had a long history of being a terrific SANFL club. I remember I went to the 1964 grand final, which was the last time they won a grand final. Very big crowd, 74,000 people there. They say big crowd at Adelaide Oval, Senator Ayres, is 54, but in 1964 there was 74,000 people at that match. Neil Curley had switched from West Adelaide to South Adelaide, took them from bottom to top. Now this is a football team in Adelaide with a great history, and they were an early adopter of women's AFL in South Australia. They put in an application. They had fewer, listen to this, Deputy President, they had fewer female toilets than they'd had grand finals in their women's football. Fewer, I'll say that again, Senator Ayres, because it takes a bit of listening to. They had fewer female toilets. They had fewer female toilets than they had premierships. Can you believe it? And so they put an application expecting... No, I'm talking about South Adelaide here. South Adelaide. They're a feeder side to the Adelaide Crows, as you should know, Senator Ruston. Well, I can't disagree with that, of course. My uncle having played for West Adelaide in the 1945 team. I was there in 83. No, unless I wasn't, Senator. But no, I'm here. I'm fully here, Senator Abetz, and you know you are embarrassed. You are embarrassed to be part of a government that would rort the system. But let's get back to South Adelaide. More premierships than they had female toilets. How was their application assessed? Well, of course, it was assessed very highly because it met all of the criteria that the government said that they were interested in following through on. But what happened? No, they didn't get the grant. They were on the original grant tick. They'd been ticked all the boxes. They'd been examined by Sport Australia. They should have got the money that they needed to improve female sporting facilities in the south of Adelaide, and they missed out, replaced by a grant in another seat which the government was trying to win. Now, as I say, we will get to the bottom of this. We've got a Sport Torts Committee. Senator Rice is obviously on it. We've got Senator Chisholm and Senator Anita Green, and bit by bit, moment by moment, they'll get to the bottom of what happened here, because what we know is that an industrial-scale rorting took place. It is a shame. It is a shame. And it's so disappointing to all those volunteers, to all those female participants who thought they were entering an honest, above-the-board scheme to allocate sporting funds, much-needed sporting funds, but finally they discovered, of course, that wasn't what happened. And the Prime Minister might think that the pandemic will smother all of the interest in this topic for Australians. Well, he's wrong, Deputy President. He's wrong. Australians still want to know what happened here. The Labor Party, with the Greens, will continue to pursue this issue, and bit by bit we'll extract the truth. We've gone a long way. We've gone a long way. We've found out a whole lot of information that we didn't know at the start of this process, but we will get to the bottom of this. We will find out exactly what the Prime Minister and his office did to override all of these recommendations from Sport Australia and to give these grants to, I'm not saying that the clubs didn't deserve applications, these other clubs, but there was a listing, a priority listing. That is what we should have followed through on. That's what the government should have followed through on. Had Labor been elected, of course, that's exactly what we would have done. We would have followed the advice of Sport Australia to give the money to those clubs that most deserved it. And the great disappointment is, and the great sadness of Australian sporting communities is that that didn't happen.
Thank you, Senator Farrell. Senator Ayres or Senator Abetz on the same matter? I'll go to Senator Abetz as the custom and then come to you, Senator
On the
Ayres.
same matter, the Australian Labor Party and the Australian Greens, in their normal coalition tactic, are seeking to pick meat off a bone that has no meat on it. The simple facts are very clear, but what is most disappointing is that the Australian Greens and the Labor Party, going through the charade of a committee, have already determined the matter. Senator Rice, the Deputy Chair in particular, has made extremely scathing judgmental comments indicating she has prejudged the matter and there is no need for her to hear any more evidence, but she continues with this charade to try to score some political points. And I must say I would have expected better from Senator Farrell, but every now and then you've got to do what your party asks you to do, and so I accept that Senator Farrell is doing his party's bidding on this occasion. But in relation to these grants, let's be absolutely clear. The Auditor-General in no way has ever used the term that the senator has just interjected onto the record. The Auditor-General has never used that term. So why is it that the Greens and Labor would seek to import words into the Auditor-General's mouth which do not exist? They did not say, or the Auditor-General did not say that which Labor and Greens are now asserting. And let's be very clear, the guidelines for this program, and many a club was asked whether they had read the guidelines, and they said they had. And in reading the guidelines, Madam Deputy President, final approval, and let me quote, and this is where the Greens and Labor always come unstuck. You know what it is? The facts. The detail. Sure, the hyperbole they spin like you would not believe, but when it comes to the detail and the fact, that is where they are found wanting. So allow me to quote for the record what the guidelines actually tell us. The Minister for Sport will provide final approval. In addition to the application and supporting material, other factors may be considered when deciding which projects to fund. Ministerial discretion and authority. And Senator Ayres foolishly interjects, Madam Deputy President, because he knows, and this is another one of these facts that the Labor Party never want the public to hear, but for the minister's involvement, the Labor Party electorates would have received substantially less funding. So Senator McKenzie, as Minister, involving herself in the process, ensured Labor seats got more funding. Talk about an ungrateful bunch. The Minister involves herself to assist Labor electorates, and all they can do is come in here and complain and say this is a rort. But the amazing thing is, Deputy President, is that none of the Labor people, or indeed for that matter, now the Greens, went around the electorate during the election campaign saying, elect us and we will not fund this particular project. They were photographed time after time, day after day, with all the various projects, all of which had been announced publicly by the minister, all out there on the public record. And what did they do? They lined up for the photo opportunities. After that, they're now criticising all the photo opportunities for which they themselves turned up for. Talk about duplicitous. Talk about two-faced. It must be embarrassing for Senator Ayres and his colleagues to look themselves in the mirror of an evening after they've given a speech such as Senator Farrell has sought to deliver and Senator Rice has delivered. Let me also indicate from the Auditor-General's report something which Labor always find very difficult, and that is, page 9, paragraph 16, and when I happened to ask about this during a committee hearing, certain people thought it was funny given my reaction that I had, but allow me to quote it for the record so that people can make up their own mind. What did the Auditor-General say? Ineligible applications were identified and no applications assessed as ineligible were awarded grant funding. Oh, there's an inconvenient fact. Senator Rice is now busily looking at some documents and Senator Farrell is drinking water because they can no longer interject on these facts. And these are the facts that need to come out in relation to this matter. If Sports Australia's recommendations would have been accepted, 30 electorates would have not received any funding whatsoever. 30 electorates out of 150, that's about 1/5 on my maths. 20% of the Australian people would have missed out completely in relation to this excellent scheme. The minister involved herself to ensure that the grants were equitably distributed geographically and politically. Indeed, if the so-called scoring methodology of Sports Australia were adopted, I think about 2/3 of the funding would have gone to coalition seats. Could you imagine the outcry? The fix was in from the start. How outrageous that the coalition seats got all the money. So when the minister seeks to make it more equitable, then that becomes a rort. And so, Madam Deputy President, we have a situation where, for example, just the other day we heard from a witness, I think it was the Belconnen Tennis Club, complaining bitterly that they had missed out, albeit that there were real issues about Tennis Australia having a conflict of interest and being provided some information beforehand about this scheme, and that's addressed in the auditor's report. But the claim was made that somehow they missed out on funding because they were in a Labor electorate. You have a look at the funding. For the ACT. There were 15 grants, if I recall correctly, into the ACT. So if the motivation was for the minister...
Senator Abetz, please resume your seat. Senator Farrell.
Breach of protocol by Senator Abetz. He's got his foot on the seat. That is not appropriate conduct. And could you please call him to order in that respect?
Thank you, Senator Farrell. Minister.
I was just wondering what was the basis of your point of order, Senator Farrell?
It's a protocol question, but it's entirely up to Senator Abetz. But it's probably on the camera, Senator Abetz. So it's up to you how you stand. I don't think there's a standing order.
Why would somebody that seeks to be the deputy leader of the Labor Party in the Senate raise such a pathetic point of order? Is this the best the Labor Party have to offer the Australian people? It seems that it is. But coming back to the Belconnen Tennis Club, because you won't distract me from that one, Senator Farrell, there was the claim being made that somehow they may have missed out because this was deep, dark Labor territory. But then when asked, can you explain about the other 15 grants or so made in the ACT, unable to explain. What is more, the ACT got 1.5% of the funding from this grant scheme. The ACT represents 1.6% of the Australian people. Talk about bang on equitable in relation to population and distribution of funding. But no, we've got this allegation that somehow funding was denied to the ACT because the 3 seats vote Labor. You see, the hyperbole from Labor is always pretty good, I've got to say, but it always lacks the fact, the detail.
Scratch the surface.
And so, Madam Deputy President, can I indicate that, and it's not, I think, any secret here, that Senator Mackenzie appeared before the committee, I think some 6 days ago, performed exceptionally well, and despite the pathetic and desperate attempts by Labor, they were unable, to use a sporting analogy, to lay a glove on her.
That's right.
They missed. They missed. You know why? Because there was no substance to the allegations that were being sought to be made against the minister, the former minister. She had performed exceptionally well. She had involved herself to ensure that there was equitable and appropriate distribution. And of course, the other thing that this committee has not done, Madam Deputy President, is call forward those organisations that were successful, that but for the minister's involvement would not have been successful. Oh, I wonder why we wouldn't have called them as witnesses. It might have destroyed the pathetic narrative of Labor and the Greens in this committee. So it's now really become quite a debacle of a show, this committee. The quicker it wraps up, the better. The determinations were made before the first witness was ever called. I'm sure that in the minds of Labor and Green senators on the committee, the report was already finalised, and mark my words, despite the Auditor-General never using derogatory terms like rot, etc., their report will be peppered with those sort of words, denying all the facts. They won't be talking about the percentages and the effective administration here by the minister to ensure equity. No, they'll be banging on about hyperbole, unfairness, the fact that more clubs got money. They'll also ignore the fact that Sports Australia itself said that just the numerical rating of the clubs' projects would not have been the sole determinant for them. They would have taken other matters into account as well. What also is unfortunate for the Labor Party is that even in this numerical ranking, when 2 individuals in Sports Australia separately, independently, analysed the same project, and this is how subjective the business is, do you know what the variation was? Up to 30 points variation. So somebody may have marked a project at 70%, somebody else, looking at exactly the same paperwork, exactly the same project, would have marked it at 40%. Now, for those of us that have to do, or had to do exams from time to time, chances are we would have thought that marking an exam paper or any assessment and having a variation of some 30% was not exactly the most robust manner in which to undertake an assessment. And so this ridiculous reliance on this figure of 74 being a cut-off point, even Sports Australia rejects that assertion. So, Madam Deputy President, you've got to ask the question, other than sheer rank politics, what is it that motivates Labor and the Greens? They are forcefully trying to put words into the Auditor-General's mouth, which the Auditor-General won't do, won't accept. They then seek to assert Sports Australia would have done something different. Sports Australia acknowledges that that is not the case. Sure, they've brought before the committee disappointed organisations that missed out. I understand that. Wouldn't it have been good if we could have funded each and every organisation? But surprisingly, Labor and the Greens have seen no need to call before us organisations that actually did succeed in getting the funding. And in the few moments left, the lack of self-awareness by some local government organisations that came before us, indicating that they were at a loss to understand how their project missed out. And when they were simply asked, do you have council officers that make recommendations to council, which the elected council then takes it upon itself to reject? The mayors and CEOs of the councils, they all had to agree and accept, yes, that occurs from time to time. And then when asked, what's the difference at the federal level if officers make a certain recommendation and the elected official makes a determination otherwise, they were at a loss to explain. And the way our system works is very simple. We have advisors, but the elected officials are the deciders, and that's the important task here to grasp, something which I'm sure the intellectual acuity of those opposite allows them to understand, but they conveniently reject so that they can keep peddling this quite nasty mantra against the former minister, but in a vain attempt to besmirch the government. This grants program has delivered $100 million to over 680 organisations around the country, and sports in Australia is better off for it, and because of Senator Mackenzie's involvement in the program.
Senator Ayres.
Madam Acting Deputy President, I rise to take note of the answers given by Senator Birmingham and Payne to the questions asked by Senators Gallagher and Brown in question time, if anybody does in fact remember question time. It's always illuminating listening
I'm sorry,
to...
Senator Ayres, my apologies. I need to put the motion that we take note of the previous answer. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, declare it. Senator Ayres.
Thanks, Madam Acting Deputy President. Always learn something from listening to Senator Farrell and Senator Abetz. I learned a lot then about Adelaide Football Club culture, and I learnt from Senator Abetz two things, I think. One is that he doesn't take public accountability very seriously, and second, that I suspect that the length of his remarks had something to do with being very anxious to avoid having to participate in a vote and a debate on Senator Hansard's motion that's going to be apparently dealt with later on this afternoon. Call me cynical, but I think that may have been it. I listened with some interest. It's hard to hear Senator Gallagher's question, but I could hear the interjections when Senator Gallagher asked the Leader of the Government in the House questions about the poor economic performance of this government. What you could hear from the backbench when she asked questions about the poor performance of the government during this Morrison recession was people yelling out, "Ask Dan Andrews, open the borders." The refrain that rose to a crescendo in the lead up to the Queensland election and then went faintly quiet, they stopped, is now starting to surge back up again as the mantra on the coalition side. The truth is, it's the premiers in Australia that have kept Australians safe. It is true that around the country mistakes have been made from time to time, but the premiers and the states have actually stepped up and taken responsibility and done the hard things. There is no economic recovery without a public health program that the country can have confidence in. There is no economic recovery in the absence of dealing effectively with the COVID-19 pandemic. There's no recovery without public confidence. Now, the Prime Minister's approach to the pandemic and the economy has been a complete contrast. Like with the bushfires, he is nowhere to be seen when the tough decisions need to be made, when other people are doing the work. He only ever turns up for good news, usually the result of the work of others. He's all announcement and no delivery, and if it was left to the characters on the back bench, Australia's performance in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic would look much more like Florida or Alabama. Our cities would look much more like Glasgow and Sheffield in terms of their public health performance, and our economy now weak to start with, weakened already, would be in a catastrophe. I heard one of the other ministers reporting saying the economic recovery is well underway. I mean, the government side have no idea the circumstances of ordinary people. The Prime Minister talked about the Canberra bubble to try and set himself somehow as this sort of daggy dad, different. The former political director, former marketing manager, former Tourism Australia manager of no account, who's spent his life in politics, somehow different from everybody else. Well, he is in a bubble within a bubble if he thinks that the economic recovery is well underway. We started in 2019 with an economy in deep trouble. 30 years of growth gone. And now we've got a country that has got low wage growth, anaemic levels of growth. The jobs that are coming out of the economy at the moment are low-quality jobs. We've got a government that's got no plan for the economy, is relying on the states for the public health response, doesn't hold a hose on bushfires. Apparently the Prime Minister didn't direct anybody in the Sports Rorts affair, according to him, and despite the evidence emerging this week, entirely unaware of the very serious allegations that have been made in this place many years ago.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bragg, on the same topic.
Yes, thank you, Madam
Senator Bragg.
Acting Deputy President. Well, I rise to take note, and I would start these remarks by just reminding the Senate of the economic position of the country coming into this pandemic. Now, Senator Ayres talks about the Morrison recession. I mean, what a ridiculous turn of phrase that is. This has been the most significant economic shock in a century, where we have seen Australia's economic performance in the top quartile, in the absolute top. I mean, there are few other countries that people will want to live in during this pandemic than Australia. Top of the pops in terms of economic performance and very strong in terms of health performance. There's been minimal community transmission of coronavirus over the past 12 months, and people want to have a debate about the pace in which the vaccine will be rolled out. Well, the reason that we can do it in an orderly fashion in this country is because there isn't enormous community transmission like there is in the UK and the US, where in many cases the virus simply wasn't taken seriously. And so we have taken this virus very seriously. We've opened the nation's chequebook. We've spent a lot of money to ensure that the country could get through this huge economic shock. Now, coming into this recession, of course, unemployment was closer to 5%. When we came to office in 2013, unemployment was closer to 6%. So over that period, we have done all we can to create more jobs. Now, over the course of the past year, there's been a big drop in employment, but we're now back to about 90% of the jobs that were lost have been re-established in some form. And so, in taking the virus seriously, it was our judgment that the borders should be closed, there should be innovations, like you've seen in the form of National Cabinet, which has given the country a more cohesive way of managing serious challenges like these pandemics. No one, as far as I'm aware, has bemoaned the loss of COAG, and I think we now have a model of managing this federation which will be enduring through this national cabinet process. And yes, there have been different ways that the virus has been managed at the state level. I don't think that the Australian people are interested in hearing sectoral and state-based wars and arguments. They're not particularly constructive. But I would say, in the case of New South Wales, I do think that the New South Wales government has had a good plan to manage the pandemic, as opposed to some other jurisdictions where their plan to manage has been to simply close the borders. But this is a federal discussion, and we will spend $100 billion on JobKeeper, which is the most serious economic policy in terms of expenditure in the nation's history, and that has been essential in getting us through to the other side. We've also taken some novel approaches to open up superannuation for people to use during the pandemic, their own money, and 3 million people have decided to use that, where people have been able to take up to $10,000 of their own money to improve their personal balance sheets. It is true that the Labor Party don't like the idea of people being able to get into the lockbox of their own money for ideological reasons, but that has been a successful policy, and that has meant that perhaps for the first time people have thought, well, actually, this is my money, and I am going to use it to improve my personal balance sheet. I'm going to use it to pay down my mortgage or reduce my debts. And that is an issue that I think has been very successful. But the real question is, what are the enduring reforms that will come from this era? Having spent so much money to help the country get through this pandemic successfully, as we look at the mass vaccinations of Australians, what will be those signature economic policies? A few of them are already before this parliament. You've seen lending reforms designed to improve the flow of credit in the economy whilst maintaining consumer protections. Equally, there has been the agenda to try and attract more foreign investment and the best foreign minds into our country. Now, we have always been a country that has competed for the finest minds and the best capital. And the process that the Prime Minister has established through the Global Talent and Investment Task Force, I think will be very important as we seek to compete with other centres like Tokyo, like Singapore, in attracting more jobs and more growth.
Thank you. Senator Chisholm.
Thanks, Madam Acting Deputy President. And if you ever needed to see an example of how out of touch and how arrogant this government is, you only needed to look at the contribution from the senator opposite just now. If you think about the type of country that they are saying they wanted to leave behind after this pandemic, they actually highlighted robbing people of a decent retirement. Robbing people of dignity in retirement was one of the things they said they are proud of. That is what this government is responsible for. And then when they actually came to talk about the vision, what they want Australia to look like in a couple of years, they rattled off a couple of things at the end. There is actually no bold vision. This government has been in power for 7 years. 7 years. And they have actually run out of puff. They don't have a vision for where they want to take the country forward. They actually don't have a plan for Australian families to look forward to go, how is my life or how is our community going to be better when Australia emerges from this pandemic? And we saw in the question from Senator Gallagher today, the Leader of the government repeats some of that same rhetoric. They try and claim that there is a recovery underway. But if you think about those 2 million Australians that are unemployed or looking for more work, how do you think they're feeling now? You think about the 1.5 million Australians on JobKeeper. That is going to end in 38 days. How do you think those Australians feel from the reaction we get from this government? They are completely out of touch. They are completely lacking in vision for a better Australia, and we absolutely deserve so much more. We also see that the pursuit of this government, we know that they're doing nothing. They haven't outlined what they are going to do when JobKeeper ends. We saw this week the government pursuing changes to industrial relations that is going to undermine the pay and conditions of working people. How's that going to help Australia get through a pandemic? How's that going to help those 2 million Australians that are either unemployed or underemployed? How's that going to help those 1.5 million Australians on JobKeeper? It obviously is not going to do that. So when considering the government record, we need to look at their rhetoric and how they deliver on jobs and the recovery. So over the last 7 years, and this is pre the pandemic, they've actually overseen record low wage growth. That was until 2019. And over that time, they've had no plan to lift wages. They've had no plan to help working people in this country to look for a better deal. And to add to that, you look at the conditions that are facing Australians as we try to get through this year. As I've said repeatedly, JobKeeper will end in 38 days. Imagine those businesses, imagine those workers attached to the business. Imagine what they're feeling at the moment. Imagine the uncertainty they're dealing with. Imagine the uncertainty their families are dealing with. We know that there's more than 250,000 of these people in Queensland. So we know there's 1.5 million around the country, there's 250,000 in Queensland, and we also know that there are 2 million Australians who are looking for work or want more work. And what does this government offer? What does it offer these people who are desperate and out there looking for work or worried about what is going to happen to them? They end JobKeeper in 38 days. They pursue legislation in the Senate and in the House of Reps that is going to undermine the pay and conditions of working Australians. The government are responsible for the stagnant wages, the job insecurity and the underemployment. This is what their 7-year record has actually delivered. And what do they offer for the recovery? More of the same. That is what they have pursued in the chamber, and that is what their vision has been for Australia. But it actually doesn't have to be the way. There is actually a better way, and that is what Anthony Albanese, as Labor leader, has started to outline. We believe in secure, well-paid jobs, better conditions, and a confidence for the Australian people that a better future is available. We know that the pandemic has done economic damage to every part of Australia. I see it, the travels I have through Queensland. There's no community that has been untouched as a result of the pandemic. But what the LNP offer these people, what the LNP offer these communities, is more of the same. More of the same. So that's 7 years of failure from this government. And Australians deserve so much better. So the opportunity this year for Labor is to actually offer those Australian people a better future. They're not going to get it from those opposite. They are out of puff and out of ideas. It'll only be an Albanese Labor government that can actually deliver that positive vision for Australia.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McDonald.
Thank you very much. So what an education the last 18 months has been for me. A fresh-faced young senator coming into this chamber and finding out about what politics is really about. What politics is really about, as Labor sees it, is repeating the same tired words over and over and over. But that does not make them right. Senator Chisholm has just told us how he repeatedly talks about the same things, and he does. He does. He repeatedly talks about the same tired rhetoric about how only Labor can rectify the jobs plans and jobs future, but it's just not true. And the reason why I know that it's not true is that the last election, Queenslanders in particular returned the coalition government because they did not feel confident that Labor was able to provide security of jobs, and they voted for us in spades. Australia has outperformed all major advanced nations with a larger proportion of Australians who were in work before this crisis began. And I hear that some of the Green senators don't understand that Australian jobs and Australians were in a better situation, in a stronger situation, thanks to the performance of this coalition government as we entered this crisis. So we had a stronger economy. We were well positioned to be able to respond with the kind of economic plans such as JobKeeper and JobSeeker. And I think we all remember that time of March last year as we went into lockdowns, as the uncertainty swept the nation, and how grateful we were to have the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg and the Prime Minister and the rest of the Cabinet respond so quickly and so strongly with programs that meant that people knew that they still had a roof over their head and food on the table and a sense of security as we entered the greatest pandemic since the Spanish flu. I just want to go through some of the recovery numbers, though, because, again, Labor doesn't seem to appreciate the extraordinary resilience of our economy and the jobs and the businesses around the nation. I continue to talk about the strength of small business in this country, how hard they work, how much they put on the line, and now how they're responding out of this difficult time. So these improvements have been broad across Australia, and we have more than 500,000 businesses employing more than 2 million Australians graduating off JobKeeper, and that was just to the end of December. So in New South Wales, 1.2 million employees received payments over the first phase of JobKeeper compared to 490,000 over the second phase. That's a fall of 60%. In Victoria, expectedly, it is a lower number. There is only a fall of 44%, reflecting the continuation of SNAP closures and of the state. But in Queensland, the fall has been 64%. And in my city of Townsville, 72% reduction. 72% reduction of the number of businesses and employees who are on JobKeeper from the end of September to the end of the December quarter. Cairns expectedly is lower than that, 55%, due to their previous international tourists who are not able to come. But Central Queensland is down 75%. These are extraordinary numbers and demonstrate the strength of our mining and resources and agricultural industries. The Gold Coast down 59% and Mackay-Whitsunday region down 71%. Now, one of the other things that Labor continues to say over and over is about the lack of secure, well-paid jobs, and that is particularly for young people. Right across Queensland, we have job vacancies, particularly in apprenticeship roles that lead to really well-paid and secure jobs, and yet Labor does not seem to be aware of it, and it's one more example of them living potentially all the time in Canberra, but certainly not out in the regions of Queensland where I'm from. So I am absolutely delighted to finish on the fact that JobKeeper in retail trade has fallen by 68%, and I applaud all the butchers out there who are back in the game thanks to people eating more food.
Thank you very much. Senator Walsh.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. Well, Australian workers and businesses are facing a JobKeeper cliff. A JobKeeper cliff in just 38 days when the government cuts this absolutely vital support. And we all know this, all of us in this place, from the conversations that we have in our communities. And we know this from the comments of the Reserve Bank Governor, Dr Lowe. But what we don't know, as a result of the government's answers in question time today, is exactly how many jobs will be lost by the government's refusal to listen to workers about their fear of this JobKeeper cliff, and their refusal to listen to small business about their fear of this impending JobKeeper cliff at the end of March. This government has demonstrated an absolute refusal to listen to the workers and the businesses that are about to be thrown off the JobKeeper cliff by this government. They've refused to listen to the Victorian events industry. They've refused to listen to the tourism industry. They've refused to listen to all of the economists and the experts, including most recently the National Australia Bank, who have warned against withdrawing support too early. But what we do know is that the government is getting ready to throw hundreds of thousands of workers and hundreds of thousands of small businesses off the JobKeeper cliff at the end of March. Almost 500,000 direct tourism jobs have already been lost, 500,000. And we know that there are hundreds of thousands more jobs in tourism that are projected to be thrown off that JobKeeper cliff in March. And despite the increasingly desperate pleas of sectors like the Victorian events industry, workers and businesses in that industry that has been so hard hit during this crisis, they face the same JobKeeper cliff. And in fact, I met with the Save Victorian Events team just this week. And so, yes, to the senators opposite, we are talking to businesses and we are hearing what businesses are saying to us. I've been speaking to representatives of businesses in live events, corporate events and the events supply chain. And I've been talking to representatives of 500 businesses across Victoria, and they've surveyed their businesses. They've spoken to hundreds of workers on the financial impact of COVID on Victoria's events industry. And the results of those conversations are very clear. And what they have told us, and I know what they are telling you, the government, is that if JobKeeper ends in March, 43% of companies will need to let staff go, and an additional 40% of companies will potentially need to close their business. So what that means is that 83% of companies in Victoria's event industry will be severely affected by the ending of JobKeeper by this government. In other words, they will be thrown off the JobKeeper cliff by this government. This government is arrogantly throwing hundreds of thousands of workers, hundreds of thousands of jobs off the JobKeeper cliff. And this government is arrogantly throwing hundreds of thousands of small businesses off the JobKeeper cliff. But we shouldn't be surprised that the government is throwing events and tourism off the cliff, because they have form. They have form. Because this is the government that not that long ago threw manufacturing off the cliff in our country when they goaded the car industry to leave. And this is the government that has not delivered any kind of plan for good, secure jobs in its now 8 years in office. The only plan from this government is the lowest wage growth on record since 2013. The only plan from this government is an explosion of insecure jobs, casual jobs and gig jobs. The only plan from this government is cuts to wages and cuts to super. That is the record of this government, and Australian workers deserve better. They deserve a government that backs them up. They deserve jobs that they can count on and jobs that keep their heads above water.
The question is that the motion moved by Senator Ayres to take note of answers be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Against no. The ayes have it.